and welcome to City of Pasco Council Workshop Meeting. The meeting thanks you for being a part of our city government. At workshop meetings, the council discusses issues, but no formal action is taken. The following Governor Inslee's statewide mask mandate, facial masks are required to be worn at all times while in the council chambers. If any individuals are unable to comply with this order, then the meeting will be recessed until compliance is met. If compliance is not met, the individual refuses to leave the chambers, then the meeting either will recess and reconvene only virtually or be adjourned. The agenda packet is available on the City of Pasco's website at www.pasco-wa.gov/agenda. Please note that the City Council workshop may be accessed through GoToWebinar. This workshop is also being televised live on PSC-TV channel 191 on Spectrum Cable in Pasco and Richland, and is streamed on the city's Facebook page, website, and YouTube channel. This and previous council workshop video is available on the city's website. Lastly, the public may submit their comments and/or questions by contacting the city manager, city clerk, or by using the Ask Pasco app. And with that, may I get I was looking for you, may I get a roll call, please?
Yes. Council members Campos?
Present.
Milne?
Here.
Roach?
Present.
Serrano?
Here.
Torres?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney?
Present.
And Mayor Barajas?
Present.
7 accounted for, Mayor.
Thank you. And will you please rise and, for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And as we move forward to item number 4, any verbal reports from council members this evening? And we'll go with Councilman Campos and then followed by Councilman Milne.
Just a quick one. I was able to go on a ride along with Pasco PD. I had a good time. It was uneventful, which was a good thing, right? Learned a lot. Have a little bit of a different perspective. I'm not entirely sure what some of my preconceived notions were, but I think they're probably dispelled. It's not all glam and glitz as I maybe thought. Looking forward to maybe hanging out with the fire guys one of my next go-rounds. I'm sure I'll see some glam and glitz on that next one.
Or good food. Thank you, Mayor. And on Friday, I did attend the COPA meeting, and just giving an update, our Sunrise Rotary, we're still working on doing the rehabilitation equipment for Kalima. We've had basically some setbacks, but I'm still working on that, and hopefully we'll get this done in the next couple weeks so that they could move forward. And I think it's basically just shows what we can do if we work together with one community versus another. So, and I was hoping you were actually going to talk about what you did this last couple of days with the mayor or the governor. Did you meet with the governor?
Oh, yes, I did meet with the governor. That was last week, Tuesday. Last week. Governor was here in town. Just hoping to talk with our community leaders regarding homelessness, regarding affordable housing, and how the cities are working together. We did have some contributors from the city of Pasco speaking on some of the issues, specifically homelessness. After some conversations with our chief of police, I got a little bit more information, and I'm happy to say that City of Pasco is participating in making sure that services are being distributed to those individuals that that are being affected by homelessness. And we were able to speak out also on the many changes regarding codes, zoning changes to again offer the opportunity for individuals to, or builders, to offer affordable housing. So again, City of Pasco is opening ways and bridging those gaps. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other council members wishes to share a little bit? Looks like there's no further comment. And with that, we move on to item 5, items for discussion. And our first item is item A, the American Rescue Plan Act funds business support program with Pasco Chamber of Commerce update. Director Sigdahl.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Tonight we have Executive Director for the Greater Pasco Chamber of Commerce, Colin Hastings, here online to give council an update on the Business Assistance Program, which is essentially a grant program utilizing ARPA funds that council authorized fairly early on last year. I believe we signed the contract early in August. We've been working with the Chamber of Commerce as city staff quite closely over the last months since authorization from council. And I can say that Chamber has worked very hard to assist as many and as much as possible all of the businesses, especially the small businesses in the community. And it has been a significant effort, but in our opinion, a very fruitful effort. And with that, Mr. Hastings will go into more details of the program and the lessons learned from it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sigdahl. This is Colin Hastings with the Executive Director of the Pasco Chamber. Good evening, Mayor Barajas and council members. Before I go into some of the slides, I do want to thank you for this opportunity for us to assist the City of Pasco in helping distribute these grants. This was an effort that was obviously needed within our community and our business community. We work closely with city staff as well as with Rolando Rodriguez with Soul Case Management, who also is joining me tonight too, and he might be able to fill in any of the detailed questions that you may have. I want to make sure I allow enough time for that. So what you see there is a slide deck. I'm going to go through some of these slides pretty quick, and I wanted to start off with just very basically the brochure that we created in conjunction with the City of Pasco, just kind of giving you an image of how we did outreach to businesses that may need relief because of the COVID pandemic. And that's the first 4 slides. So if you go to the second slide, you see that it goes into a little bit more detail. And we also provided it in Spanish. So on the third slide, you see that we concentrate a lot of efforts to do outreach so that we're able to reach the community as needed. And again, if you go to slide 4, you see that the same information is provided also in Spanish. One of the ways that we try to make this process is engageable and easy as possible is allow the application to be done online in a printable sort or a fillable sort of format. You see here is a sample of screen grabs of what the English application had. It comprised of, at least in the slide deck, 2 pages, but asked basic information about business name as well as information about the business, and to make sure, which I'll go into detail a little bit further, some of the pertinent information that we're looking for with these businesses. So if you want to go to the next slide too, you can see that it kind of continues on with the diving in a little bit deeper with these businesses and how they may have been affected by the pandemic and the shutdowns, as well as find some more information as to if these companies had the option to share if they've requested any other assistance outside of these ARPA funds, for example, like CARES grant or PPP and so forth. Go to the next slide shows that we did that also in Spanish. And same questions cross-referenced over, as you can see in the next slide as well too, in Spanish. So the application parameters, if you want to go to the next slide, shows what businesses that were going to apply needed to fulfill to at least get the process started. So the business had to be, since these are federal funds, but they're distributed through the city of Pasco, they had to be operating a business within the city of Pasco limits or have a Pasco business license. Also, their UBI number had to be active with Washington State. We asked businesses to provide us pre-COVID sales. And so we picked a range of time from April 1st, 2019 to March 31st, 2020. And the idea is of this, since we're launching this in August of 21, it gave us a good year window to really kind of get an idea of the gravity of what sort of effects these businesses may have experienced because of the COVID pandemic. And so conversely, we also wanted to get total gross revenue from April 1st, 20, which was a little bit after the shutdown started, through March 31st of 21. That way it gave myself, Rolando, our team, as well as the committee that was reviewing these applications, a really good snapshot as to what effects they had in terms of revenue. In addition to that, we asked for businesses to provide 2019 and 2020 federal tax returns. The idea behind that is these are federal funds. We want to make sure we're ensuring that these businesses that may qualify or receive this relief are federal taxpayers. And also was looking for documentation of eligible expenditures, a signed W-9, just in case they would receive a grant, we can get them funding as quickly as possible. And as I mentioned before, the application was reviewed by a committee of three, which was comprised of two small business owners and a banking executive. One of the small business owners used to be in the banking industry, so we felt like we had a lot of experience in terms of providing the of going through the information and having that sort of financial eye from that, as well as the experience. We made the process for the committee to review the applications so that they were anonymous as well too, just to make sure everything was equal for all parties. We opened the application process on August 16th through a web portal on the Pasco Chamber website. City of Pasco and our team was good about getting that information out, directing interested companies into going online to fill out those applications. The period of time was, as you see, almost 30 days and is initially closed on September 14th. I'm going to jump around a little bit, but it'll kind of hopefully all make sense. The total amount of applications we received through that period was 177 applications. About 10 of those applications were 100% complete. And mostly the areas where the businesses weren't able to provide us the information that we're asking was that portion of information of gross revenue through those periods of time from 19 to 20 and 20 to 21. And so we had a lot of work ahead of us to help us determine what that information was, just because I think from what I'll go into a little bit more information in terms of lessons learned of the ability of these businesses to provide that information when we requested. Of those original 177 initial applicants, about 20 of them hadn't filed their 2020 taxes yet, and they had asked for the extension, which quite a few businesses do. So their tax returns weren't due until October 15th. With that, we extended the deadline to October 22nd, 2021, which that extension wasn't just limited to those 20 companies that hadn't filed their 2020 taxes yet. It actually helped us and Rolando and his team too, to help those businesses that quite didn't make that September 14th deadline, needed to provide more information. And so we're working on basically the whole pool during that time when we extended it to October 22nd. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. For all the companies, about 27 of those companies never completed the application in total, and there's various reasons. Some lost interest, I guess, if you will. They didn't want to complete the process. Some businesses had multiple owners and they weren't on the same page as well too. Some just maybe felt like the process was a little bit more for them that they're able to provide, and so they never completed the application. Of those 177, we did compile quite a bit of information, even though what we were asking for in the application was pretty succinct. We were still able to extrapolate quite a bit of information that gave us a really good snapshot as to what was going on in Pasco with some of the businesses. So 135 of those applicants had already received a form of COVID relief. As I mentioned before, that could have been in the form of PPP and EIDL. It could have been with the CARES Act funding that the county dispersed, or even previous funding as well too from the city of Pasco through DPDA, and then there's other sources as well too. 91 of the businesses were women-owned, 115 were minority-owned, and it goes on a little bit more into detail in terms of some of the other demographics as well too. And these are just the original application pool. The next slide shows us that we did award relief for 86 of those companies of the 177. And mind you, there's a chunk of those that never completed the process. And now we're basing a lot of this information based on the application they gave us. So some of the numbers don't really line up, and you'll see in the first two bullets that 44 were women owned. The second bullet points out that 50 were minority owned, but if you go down to about the sixth bullet, you can see that at least 70 identified as Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin. So, some other great information that we received from that was that one of the questions was how many FTEs, full-time employees that these businesses represent, and there's 267 and a half employees. Added up the pre-COVID revenue, as you remember that April 1st, 19 to March 31st, 2020, had about $29 million in annual revenue. And then that second period of time post the shutdown, you can see there's quite a decline where we were able to see, based on the application data, 16.9 million in revenue during that period of time. When we got into the process, and I'll touch on this a little bit on the other slide too, the demand was much more than expected. And so we did raise the pool in terms of dollars, and I'll touch on that a little bit more, but you can see there was requests of about $2.2 million in that application where the company was able to provide their financial data. They could request the amount of money that they felt would help make them whole or close to whole, and there's a cap of $30,000 on that request. So you can see of that, almost $2.2 million of the grants that were dispersed for the 86 companies that qualified. You can see that was about $1.65 million. The next slide shows, and it may be a little bit difficult to see in council chambers, but a little pinpoint map of businesses where they're located that were in receipt of this relief. I'd like to focus a little bit more. Maybe you can see above where it says Pasco, which is basically in downtown Pasco. There's a little yellow that shows that there's 21 businesses in that area. If you go a little bit northwest, you can see on Court Street, there's a cluster of 13 businesses, and then it spreads out a little bit more above that. You might see a couple pins that are outside of city limits. Those may be of residences or something along those lines, but they met the criteria of being a city of Pasco business with their license that is up to date. The next slide kind of goes into some of the lessons learned. And I can tell you that I want to fit this onto one slide. We probably could have filled a few slides with this to really go into detail in terms of some of the things that we would have done a little bit different. But I think these are some of the top line areas that, as I mentioned before, we saw instantaneously that the demand was higher than the $500,000 that we originally set aside for relief. And so council, thank you, acted on that. And at the time we had to make a best guess scenario of where we're at because we're still in the application open enrollment process. So council approved up to $2.7 million to meet those requests. The council felt like it was in the best interest to provide businesses if they were eligible for the max amount instead of having to adjust and only provide a percentage of what maybe they need with that original amount. So going a little bit larger gave us the flexibility to fully fund requests that were eligible and that were able to qualify for that. A lot of the businesses didn't have, about 20 of them, didn't have the full year of financials because they opened in 2019 pre-pandemic. And so with that, thanks in part to the tax returns that really gave us a good glimpse into what their business was, where we were able, with the help of Orlando and Soul Case Management, create a model of a calculator that would show on average what their business would have of revenue would have had if they were open for the whole year. As an example, if a business opened up in August of 2019, we're able to create a baseline year over year from 19 to 20 based on what information they did have. I have to say, just kind of in jest though, we received that information from their initial application of businesses and say they opened in August. And there's a few occasions once they realized the businesses what were going on, they adjusted what they said they may have opened their data onto, I think, to help capture a little bit more of the information. But because we had, like I said, the extra data, it really helped us get a good glimpse as to what the actual pulse of the company was. Of note, I thought was kind of interesting too, is a third of the applicants filed their business tax returns with their social security number. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a common practice, but I think it starts showing us a little bit of the symptoms of what we see with these businesses that need relief. And I think it starts kind of steering us in a direction that shows that some of these businesses aren't quite operating in a sophisticated financial manner. And so I can dive in a little bit more into that a little bit later too. Excuse me. We did have quite a few daycares that applied, and they didn't receive they didn't qualify based on our parameters because at that time, Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Family provided quite a bit of funding for daycares, which were what we're looking for in this process is essentially revenues in 19 and in 20 during that prescribed period. If they are less, then that kind of let us down a little bit more where we can start looking in and see if they're more qualified. A lot of businesses that may have applied actually saw an increase in revenue year over year. Some actually quite dramatically too, but there was no harm in terms of applying. You never know what fruition you may get out of that, especially with an application process, which was pretty seamless and was able to do it online. But as I mentioned before, I think a lot of the percentage of these businesses could improve how they handle the process of their financials. We heard quite a bit that a lot of these businesses put a faith in their tax preparers. Even in some cases, when we dove into this information, saw that their taxes were being filed improperly. This is just a symptom of a bigger sort of issue that could come up, in the sense that because we had the benefit of having people with banking experience on our committee that reviewed these applications, they could see that if any of these companies were ever to go into their institutions, financial institutions, looking for a loan, a line of credit, they wouldn't meet the qualifications or standards that a bank would provide them that. And so I think it goes in not just to the ability to properly run your business, but how can you have a foundation, create a foundation to grow your business on as well too. I think that we at the chamber and most everybody in the room there knows that, you know, having the business and creating an economy is good, but we want to help build that as well too, and having the right tools in place are necessary to do that. I would say, and this is more anecdotal, and Rolando could probably back me up on this, I think a lot of the applications that we received really didn't have an idea of what their income was in a year until they file their taxes with their tax preparer the following year. They don't have a sense of the pulse of what their business is actually doing. And so the next slide kind of shows a little bit of an example of that. And I don't mean to be mean, but this was kind of some of the information that we received, which I think really gives a sample as to how these businesses are operating. And so you see that there was just information in terms of dollar amounts written on, lined ruled paper or old-fashioned receipts. I put up a picture of a business license that we received that somebody took a picture on the wall, which is great. But in terms of being good stewards of federal money, we needed to have a good facsimile of some of this information. So a lot, and Rolando could jump in on this. When I say a lot, I mean a vast majority of the information we received was first received basically in this sort of format. So we had a lot of digging to do around, and I wanted that image in the middle where you can see with the blue header and the payment history. That was actually from one of the tax preparers that also was able and applied for the information. So the next slide kind of summarizes that up. I know I kind of went over it quick and talked fast, but I want to be able to answer any of the questions that council has. But to summarize, we had quite a bit of man hours into the team that we put into this. That includes the committee members going over the application. Just the committee member hours that they put in was approaching 100 hours. So it was, and they did it all on a voluntary sort of basis. So a lot of credit goes through them. They took the role extremely seriously. They wanted to make sure they were fair and equal in this process. And from our standpoint too, we wanted to keep records as clean, clear, and precise as possible, because of this federal grant program, we're subject to an audit from the federal government, and so that has been scheduled and probably will start in October 2022. That coincides right after the end of the fiscal year for the Pasco Chamber of Commerce. So they just look holistically not only into this program that we're administering for the city, but also for the health of the Pasco Chamber and how we do our practices and so forth. So it's a very intense single time audit. Rolando, is there anything that maybe I didn't cover or that you want to touch on that I may have overlooked?
No, I think you did a great job. So thank you so much. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to give you a short presentation of what we learned. Obviously, as Mr. Collins indicated, what we did learn was that there's still quite a bit of need for many of the businesses. As you looked at the map that were in the downtown area that received the funding, that was the vast majority of those, that there's still a need to improve their accounting and their business practices to be more in line with what we would consider appropriate business practice. And that's going to assist them for long-term growth and also for the prosperity of Pasco. So that was, thank you for giving us the opportunity. We learned a lot, and we're grateful for that.
So Mayor, we're happy to answer any sort of questions that you may have.
Thank you, Colin. And I will turn to my council members. Any questions or comments from council?
Hey, Colin, thank you for that presentation. I do have one quick question for you. And I gotta say, you guys did a good job of putting that process together. I know how stressful that can be, especially when you're working with federal funds. From my personal experience, it's not fun. But my quick question is, for those that didn't complete, that hadn't filed their tax returns, were you able to ask for a profit and loss for the year? Since they typically have to have that completed regardless of their filing status.
I'll probably need Rolando to jump in on this as well too, but I'll take a stab at it here. We almost had to provide and create a vast majority of these businesses' profit and loss statements. The information provided was sporadic and, like I said, came in various different forms. So, and I think that was evident in the fact the application you saw there that we asked what revenues were pre-pandemic and then during the pandemic. Once we were able to cross-reference it with a baseline, even though the timeline was a little bit different, but pretty darn close on their tax returns, a lot of the numbers were very, they varied quite a bit in either direction. Some had more revenue than they thought, some actually had less revenue than they had thought. So the late filers, yes, we're able to provide and basically verify the information that they provided us. There was quite a few instances out of those 20 where the numbers that they filed in their taxes did not correspond with the numbers that we had or what they put in their application. So we looked into that and made the adjustments necessary. I don't recall off the top of my head of those 20 late filers, what the breakdown of those that were able to end up in the long run receiving funding or not. I would only be taking a guess at this point. I could probably provide that information a little bit later, unless Rolando, you have that information a little bit more fresh in your mind.
No, I don't. But to answer your question, we provided every applicant the opportunity to get us the information that was required from the city. One of the specific requirements was a completed tax returns for the 2 years. So we requested that. We were working obviously with the profit and loss statements you were saying, and then they were all given ample time to bring additional information and as Colin indicated, even extensions. So everyone was provided ample time, and the process is very fair.
Yeah, Rolando's office was pretty busy, and our office was too, with walk-up applicants that needed use of scanning the documents in, and we always made a priority to take care of that information, capture the information, and hand back the hard copies to them. We have, in terms of data that we've shared with the city of Pasco, you'll see that there's quite a bit of size of data that we have. Most of it obviously in PDF form, and then we were able to drop it into spreadsheets as well to extrapolate some of that data. But there was a period of time where there was just a lot of one-on-one customer service type of service that we provided, just so that we can help the applicants. I think that one of the takeaways was success was higher from those applicants that did seek one-on-one counseling to help provide the information. There was a period of time, especially early on, where I think some of the businesses relied on other organizations or their tax preparer to provide the information, and it just wasn't complete thoroughly until we made multiple one-on-one meetings with those applicants to really kind of sort through the information so we can provide them the best opportunity to receive any sort of relief that they're eligible for.
Thank you both.
Go ahead, Council. Mayor Pro Tem. Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Barajas. And thank you, I just want to start off with saying, thank you so much, Colin and Rolando, for all the hard work that you and your teams put into this. I mean, we were probably, if we weren't the first one in the state, first city in the state to work with this on ARPA funds, we were one of the first. I'm just thankful that we as a council moved so quickly to help these businesses, and then your team was able to help get the money out there as quickly as possible. So I do have two questions for you. First is, how has the feedback been from both businesses that received funds and those that didn't?
So the feedback has been varied. I would say that of the feedback that we received, those that were denied, they were disappointed. We made an extra effort to reach out to them and explain the reasoning as to why that their application was not accepted. And I think all but maybe one or two of those, I had a better understanding as to why and understood the reasonings why. And we made a point to reach out to those businesses that were denied instead of leaving them hanging. I think the process, and maybe that's where some of the feedback is coming on, it was kind of a drawn out process, longer than we expected, as you can see based on the dates that we extended it, over a month beyond that. So I think that there was a sense of eagerness to get the funding as quickly as possible. And we, as applications were approved after they were reviewed by the committee, we were providing the relief checks. There was quite a few applicants that we needed more information. So there were periods of time, and I might have it handy up on my computer. I think the first set of checks were issued early on in the process, like maybe, give me just 1 second while I thought I had this open. The first checks were issued, just kind of singing and dancing here when my Excel opens. The first checks were issued on 9/27. So, almost immediately after that first initial ending stage. And then we continued to issue checks all the way into, I think the last checks were issued, looks like the last one was on November 22nd. And part of that process was once the company qualified and agreed to accept the money, they had to sign another document saying, hey, this is, federal funds, they need to be used appropriately, can't be double dipping, so on and so forth. And so we had to collect those contracts. But between that period of time, from late September to late November, there were probably around 12 or 13 batches of checks that were sent out. And before I forget, Mayor Pro Tem, I appreciate you bringing up the fact that the city of Pasco was the first to do this. From our research, when we're getting started on this, Pasco was far and away head and shoulders above all other entities that received ARPA funding of providing that relief to business owners. And I think even still now, Pasco is probably one of the few. I haven't done any research lately. I've kind of seen in the periphery some other cities and other entities that have this form. I can tell you it wasn't on the scale that we have, especially in terms of percentage of our population. And I think you had a second question?
No, I'll save that one for later. I just thank you very much for providing that additional information. It's knowing how people perceive it and how people experienced it is really important. So again, thank you so much for being able to help get this money out there into the hands of people who needed it as quickly as possible. So thank you so much for being a good partner.
And I don't mean to dwell on the negative as well too. We did get quite a bit of positive response as well too, thanking us for the funds and how it kept their business afloat and helped them through some really hard times. And you can tell by the financials of some of those companies that really needed it, based on the size of their company. It was it may have not been a huge portion of their revenue, but a little bit helped kept their employees, on the payroll. And so we did receive quite a bit of positive feedback too.
Thank you. And we do have one other comment from Councilman Milne.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, good report, Colin Hastings. I did have a quick question for you. I know when you talked about previous revenue, previous sales, most businesses, all they have to do is look at their Washington State sales liability reports, and we could actually do that within minutes. Was there like a thing for the businesses that you got? What was the reason why they couldn't come up with this information? Because, every month you have to turn in your sales liability reports, and to me, that's just surprising that this would be the biggest draw or handicap for people turning in things, because, it's state law. You have to send in your reports every month.
So lessons learned, I think, would have been that we would have asked for Department of Revenue filings. Some are on monthly, some on quarterly, depending on the revenue that they have. Some businesses may only do it annually, just because we had a range of revenue that some businesses had $12,000 in revenue in a fiscal year, on up to some that were in the multiple millions of dollars. So I think, once you get into the process, that probably would have made things a lot easier. A lot of the times, though, we did receive that information, and still the numbers didn't quite align. And so we had to do a lot of detective work to kind of get that information as well, too. Rolando, you were a little bit closer to that. What sort of perspective do you have on that as well?
Again, what Collins was saying is they have businesses reported differently, and so many of the times it comes back to the level of sophistication in where we're gathering some of the data. So that again goes back to the need that's still there, and then also with some of those businesses, in order to improve their accountability, how they report, and that again will allow them to make better decisions moving forward. That was the difference. I do want to add one thing. Obviously, there were some people that were upset that they didn't get funding, but the vast majority of the businesses were very thankful, and I'm still appreciative of how many do thank me, even when I go into their stores or their businesses, that they still, and I was telling them to thank the city council for stepping up when other cities weren't doing it. So thank you so much, because some of those businesses did need it. I know of one particular bakery that was in the verge of closing, and when he did get his money, there was tears coming out of his eyes. And he was so thankful because he's still in operations now, and that's a business that we need. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the answer. I do really appreciate that, and I wasn't aware that you could do your state liability once a year. So I guess we learned something new on that. So, but thank you. I do appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Hastings and Mr. Rodriguez, for your presentation and for providing that information to council. Any other questions or comments? Looks like there's none, so we will move on to item B.
Madam Mayor, if I could add one quick comment
Absolutely.
to that. There will be about $1 million that was allocated to this program that will be returned back, given that we have completed the grant program. So I just want to let you know that that will be moved back into the remaining ARPA funds and taken out of the allocations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So item B, single room occupancy housing, Director White.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. And this issue was brought up with Council about actually 2 weeks ago exactly. But it's coming back to Council at your request for additional opportunity for comment on the conversion of basically hotels into single room occupancy kinds of land uses. The agenda report contains a brief summary of our existing regulations and our existing process. And it also lists, I think, a number of considerations of how single-room occupancies may affect housing supply and affordability. And then lastly, some options for council's discussion and consideration are listed. Not necessarily the only options, but certainly one to throw out there to get your input. So staff is here to listen to that discussion, noting that possibility of maybe placing this item on one of the issue papers for the council retreat may be an option that isn't listed.
Thank you for that introduction. And do we have any questions or comments? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor Barajas, and thank you, Director White, for pulling this together. I know I was the one who kind of brought this forward, and I continue having some concerns. We're missing a lot of data as to what the impacts will be. One of the items that the staff has listed is that these have been being used for equivalent of long-term housing in some cases, where there's a set of folks who live in some of these hotels as de facto apartments. And so one of my big concerns is, if that's the case, are the conversion of these going to put more people on the streets in downtown Pasco and exacerbate a problem that we're separately trying to solve, or does it help resolve that issue? And I think that there's I'd hate to be bringing apartments for Amazon workers that are coming in, but then kicking more people out in the street in our downtown. So I think that there's a lot of information we don't know. And given that, yes, well, we have a portion that is in Pasco that are looking at converting. Currently, I think you said 7% of the total hotel rooms in the Tri-Cities are being converted just in Pasco. But overall, we're seeing about 25% across the Tri-Cities. That's a substantial chunk. So I guess what I'd like to see personally, and I'll just kick off the conversation, is I do not want to interrupt the three properties that are going through the process. Obviously, they have already applied. They're already going through the permitting process. I certainly don't want to try stepping in and halting anything to do with them. But I'm interested in if we're just putting together or putting a moratorium in place for future applications until we complete the work on the housing action plan, consult with the hoteliers, and understand how it's going to impact the hotel market, and understand whether it's going to overall how is it going to impact our homeless population, especially in our downtown? It's already such an issue. Until we have some more of those factors pulled together, I know that will just simply take some time. I would hate for us to be in a situation where we're creating a long-term problem without any good solutions. What we're trying to solve one issue, we're creating another issue altogether. So, and I will just add that Kennewick and Richland both just rejected 2 conversions, one in each city. And so obviously there's some concerns that are being raised from our neighboring communities that maybe I'm not sure that we've addressed in our regulations and direction for these. So I don't want to get in this position where we're now up against a wall where we're having to convert something that the other cities may have rejected, or anything like that. So I guess I want to see a little more information as we're doing what's into being a pretty major change to the Tri-Cities. So thank you. That's my thoughts on this.
Thank you for that. Valid concerns. Any other comments or questions from our council members? Councilman Melny.
Yeah, I would actually prefer to bring this. I'd like to hear what Mayor Pro Tem Maloney is talking about at our retreat. I think this is one of my top issues, being the homeless and trying to solve this issue, because it's definitely not getting any better. So I'd like to, if I had my own druthers, I would have a more in-depth conversation on this. Some of the stuff that you talked about with our governor, and try to move forward in what we could do to lessen the impact of homelessness. Because I don't want to have this huge, great, plaza and everything, and then have homelessness all around and people don't come. We've invested a lot of money in these projects, so I would prefer we have our retreat in a couple weeks here, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and kind of dive more into that and actually have more better understanding of what everybody on the council is thinking on, make it more of a bigger issue with the homeless and what our Mayor Pro Tem is talking about. So that's my issue, but I don't want to take all night talking about this. So
Thank you. Any other concerns or? Go ahead,
Thank you.
Councilman Serrano.
Thank you. I think kind of tying those two together is where I sit. I recognize our retreat's 4 weeks away, but if there's a concern that, again, I mean, 7% of the hotel rooms in Tri-Cities are being converted in this city. That's pretty strong number there. My concern would be if we expect more applications to place a moratorium on it, at least temporarily, and then have that full-fledged conversation as a retreat item as to whether or not this is a solution, and then we could lift it at any time, I think. You know, what I do find interesting is this ordinance is just now 3 years old. And I wish I had the time to go back. Did we make this decision based on a mandate from the state, or was this pure voluntary?
No, it was voluntary. There were some requests for an ordinance along these lines, but there was no mandate.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think this is potentially, this potentially is one of those where we need to make sure that as a council, when we're discussing these things that come from the community, from other entities, that we really kind of sew them down before making a decision, because here, 3 years later, we might be really placing some of our hotels at risk. And quite frankly, then there's funds that go with Visit Tri-Cities, different entities that are going to be this cascade impact. So again, my perspective is, if we're concerned that over the next 4 weeks that we're going to have additional permits en route, maybe we should place an immediate moratorium and then walk it back, or whatever we decide to do from our council retreat. That's my take.
City Manager, do you have a comment?
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council. Appreciate the comments tonight. I would just make the observation that we don't know if we're going to get another application in the next 4 weeks. And if council is concerned about that, I think we probably should bring a moratorium ordinance together sooner than 4 weeks from now. So especially since we just telegraphed, we're going to talk about it in 4 weeks. So.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think that whether it's next week or, okay, that's my take. I'm not going to speak for all 7. I'd like to see it on the agenda next week with an ordinance.
No, Councilman Campos, and then we'll go to Councilwoman Torres.
I'll just try to keep this brief just so we can kind of get some consensus up here. I initially really kind of, based on my comments last week, I really am in favor of what the market presents. That just seems to be the right way to go about it. I think 7% is a small drop in the bucket relatively, but also you're looking at possibly talking about Airbnb as far as the council discussion in the next week. So there's an opportunity for, tourism spaces and not prohibiting people coming into our area. I remember, I think Zara and I worked on planning commission to help kind of present this ordinance to the city council at the same time. So I'd be willing to step back from that and kind of follow the lead of whatever council goes with. So I'm in agreement with whatever we decide tonight.
Thank you for that.
I'm also in favor of a moratorium and then further discussion at our council retreat. But I did have one question. On the community survey that went out, I think in the fall, was there a question about the single room occupancy on there at all?
No, there wasn't. There, excuse me, there was a question on short-term rentals, but not single-room occupancies.
Okay, thank you.
Just to refresh my memory, Director White, the 3 applications for these SROs are hotels in the downtown area, is that correct?
No, they're not. One is on the 1800 block of Lewis, West Lewis. One is near the Oregon Avenue and US 12 interchange, and one is on 10th Avenue near the Cable Bridge. Now, I did I'm just throwing this out there. This isn't hard data. I did speak with Mr. Novakovich from the Visitor Convention Bureau, and I asked him his opinion of what was happening, because each city is having a relatively significant amount of conversions, at least applied for. He thinks is the Visitor and Convention Bureau is fairly neutral on this process, at least as it's occurring right now. He understands that it might involve a large amount of hotel rooms, quote, large amount. However, they're generally underperforming hotels that they don't steer people to anyway. And he feels that they might be increasing the profitability of those that they do steer people to, recognizing that overall it is, in fact, locking out a certain amount of the available hotel space in the Tri-Cities. So just FYI, I did speak with him, and at least that was his take on this phenomenon.
And that was my own personal take on just these 3 possible hotel locations and the applications, that they're not really in competition for places to stay for tourists. And I guess, you know, I would say that I'm in favor of the first option that staff has presented here, and take no further action at this moment, and go further and spend some time on it at our retreat, talking about it. I certainly, you know, we brought this forward to council as a planning commission in 2019 and worked on it, workshopped it prior to that upon whatever request came to us. And so at that time, there was no option. And now there's an option and someone's applying, and we're basically saying we're going to cut off your option. And so I don't think I'm personally in favor of doing that to an applicant in our city, or the 3 if they're different ones.
Mayor, if I could, I would like to ask our Deputy City Attorney, Mr. Briggs, to talk a little bit about the moratorium and what that means and its temporary nature, so council has a good understanding. It's been a while since we've had a moratorium on anything. Last one was marijuana, and ultimately ended in a ban, which is a permanent thing. But a moratorium is generally, just by nature, temporary in nature. So maybe Craig.
And so, and all that, I'll let my esteemed colleague Jeff Briggs also speak to this point. But the city manager is correct. Obviously, the moratorium approach, I don't know that we would necessarily need to go through the route of doing an ordinance to do that. I think that's something we could accomplish by resolution. It would be, again, temporary in nature. And I think most everyone on the council here tonight's kind of identified the main issue here, which is, for all intents and purposes, a lack of information concerning some of the challenges that we would face with an SRO. I think, you know, one of the key challenges is making sure that we have very, you know, clearly defined policies. But again, we want to also make sure that, you know, we're drafting those policies in a way that is non-discriminatory. Now, there's been a lot of, not a lot, but some case law concerning SROs, because there's a natural kind of stereotype out there that, you know, these areas are apartments that are going to tend to attract single males, and you know, that's not an environment that's necessarily conducive to, you know, rearing of children. So we want to be careful about how we, you know, are setting any kind of policy concerning occupancy and limits. We want to make sure that we are applying those policies across the board in a non-discriminatory fashion. There is some, you know, heightened scrutiny that would apply in the event that a policy were challenged. My understanding at this point is that we've, you know, identified where in the city these SROs can be located, but I don't know that we've done much more concerning, you know, adopting a specific policy with regard to, you know, occupancy limits, which I think is key. So I think, you know, part of, together with the study that's referenced in our agenda report, make sure I don't misquote it, the housing capacity plan, which is to be completed this summer. I think we'd also, you know, want to take a look at specifically, you know, what other agencies throughout the state of Washington have done with regard to, you know, implementing a policy for SROs. We want to have as much information as possible, you know, before we put that down in writing. You know, the other option with regard to a repeal, I know that is listed in the agenda report. I think that would probably be something that we would do by way of an ordinance. In the event that the council chooses to take no further action and just you know, look at those studies, I think that's also a viable option. But in any event, before you know we put you know, a policy in writing, I think we want to make sure that we have that information at our ready. Jeff, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Sure. Thanks for the introduction, everyone. And just a few observations here. First, to respond to Mr. Zabel's query about what a moratorium would look like. I do agree with Craig that would be via resolution, or Mr. Briggs, that'd be via resolution. So it'd be initially for 60 days, and then we could extend a moratorium with findings at a subsequent public hearing. After that initial 60-day period, it can be extended in 6-month increments while we're studying the issues of the moratorium or related to the reasons why we issued the moratorium. I would point out that the purpose of this ordinance, I went ahead and pulled the ordinance that established the SRO program and looked at the whereas clauses. And it was to provide housing, as Director White points out, for the less advantaged, low income, moderate income families. And that makes sense because when you look at the permit criteria for SROs, one of the criteria is that the applicants meet HUD guidelines for SRO permits. And that's more than a coincidence because actually the SRO terminology was created by HUD. It's part of a program, a federal program where they provide grants for housing that is it matriculates through public housing authorities. So one consideration that we could do is partner with the Pasco Franklin County Housing Authority to identify these facilities and do SRO permits through facilities. The good thing about that is if it's a HUD program, then HUD actually fixes the amount of rent that can be assessed by the landlord, and they also assist with fixing up the facilities. Right now we have a program where we have, people have applied for these SRO permits. I think it's the same entity that's applied for all three, and that entity is not a nonprofit. They haven't partnered with HUD, and they're also vested. So any action that we take, at the next council meeting in terms of passing a resolution to establish a moratorium would not affect their vested permit rights. I do agree that it's too early to tell whether these SRO conversions that are occurring right now that are vested will sort of meet the goals of the ordinance that established the SRO permit. And the last thing that I would point out is sort of the differences with the Richland and Kennewick cases. Though in both of those cases, which I believe also involved the same person or entity that's converting these SROs. In both of those instances, the cities were acting as the owner of the property. And with the city of Pasco, we're just the permitting entity. And so I think there is a fundamental difference between, a city's decision whether or not to sell a property, which it's certainly inclined to do or not to do for pretty much any reason, versus, if someone vests an application to convert a hotel and they have a deal with the private owner to buy that hotel. And that's really what we have here in Pasco. So I think that, it's a done deal in terms of the vested permits that we have. Certainly the moratorium would not affect those. And we would just be looking prospectively at, whether this SRO ordinance is actually, doing what we intended it to do. And that's all that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Briggs. Well, we have another comment from Councilman Campos.
Just very last thing, kind of piggyback off what Rick White said and Councilwoman broach, by limiting this, we're potentially limiting a developer coming in and improving buildings, facilities that are maybe dilapidated or underutilized. And again, it's just a comment, open for discussion, something to think about or remember when we talk about this in the future. And I think it's important that, like Zara said, we don't want to take that tool away from people in the future, but willing to talk about data and how this works out.
All right, thank you. Well, I agree with the majority of the discussion here going on here. There's definitely concerns, and I do feel that we do need further discussion on this topic. And I thank you and Mr. Briggs, with both Briggs, for the assistance and explanation. So the majority of the council would like to have a further discussion. At that point, I guess we'll figure out if we're going to build a resolution. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Briggs.
I was going to say we could certainly have a resolution prepared for next week's meeting so that the council could take action on that item.
Perfect. And did you have another comment, City Manager?
He took my comment away.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we will move forward with the resolution as soon as we can get that, and then we'll have further discussion at our retreat. Another comment from Councilman Serrano.
Just quickly, what Mr. Jeff mentioned, as far as working with HUD, to the extent that that information can be brought to our retreat, I think that'd be extremely valuable, especially if we could find ways to finance or have an external entity finance some of these rehabilitation projects. And as well as the need here locally for these types of units from whoever designates the grants from HUD and those types of entities. I think that'd be extremely beneficial to our conversation in a couple weeks.
Thank you, appreciate that. All right, any further comment on this topic? Looks like there's none, and so Mr. Briggs, Mr. Zabel, do you need any further comment from us? Any direction?
I think we have it. Thank you. Appreciate
Perfect,
that.
thank you. So with that, we'll move on to item C on our agenda. Discussion, fire services financial strategy, Director Sigdell.
I'm going to jump in just for a couple comments before we get started. So again, good evening, Mayor, Council. This is, as you recall, we had a conversation about fire stations just a few weeks ago at workshop where we talked about the additional need for those stations and some of the drivers, the growing call volumes, growth, those type of things that we're seeing and we're predicting in our near future. So the Chief Gear and Finance Director Sigdell tonight are going to review with us. We're going to get into a little deeper in some of those major factors that are driving the need. Provide council a high level review. We're not getting into the nitty gritty, but a high level review of potential funding sources for financing future stations and equipment and staff. And I have a couple comments I want to say when we wrapped up before, if I could, before council deliberates. But with that, I want to turn it over to Director Sigdell.
Thank you.
I guess I'll go ahead and start off.
Thank you.
So with our first slide, what would drive the need for additional fire stations? Well, first, and one of the things that's been very important to council in the past has been trying to maintain that Survey and Rating Bureau Protection Class 3 because of the benefit to the property owners and their reduced insurance classifications. Basically, your insurance goes up, your homeowners or property insurance goes up about 10% with each increase in classification. So there is certainly some financial incentive that can offset some costs. Previous councils all along have had a travel time. Now travel time, that's not total response time, but just the travel time from the station to a call of 6 minutes or less 90% of the time. And again, trying to maintain that has been a previous council goal and may come up for discussion again when we go to council retreat this year, whether we maintain that goal. The commercial and industrial growth along State Route 395 corridor, especially the addition of the Dairygold facility, which is actually 6 miles from our closest fire station, which may not qualify for fire insurance. because of the distance from the station. 5 miles is a cutoff with the rating bureau to provide insurance for facilities. So that's going to be an issue that's going to come up in the future with that Durigo facility and all the other expansion that the port has planned going north of Foster Wells Road along Highway 395. And then one of the issues that surprisingly came up with our citizens group when we updated the strategic plan was the lack of a second fire station on the east side of Pasco. And the fact that the one fire station that's there on Oregon Street spends a lot of its time on calls west of the railroad tracks. And leaves a large area with no protection, or well, not no protection, with delayed protection coming from either the airport fire station or the fire station on Court Street. So that has been an issue that came up with the citizens group. The increased call volumes on the west side, it's been really interesting. When I came here 13 years ago to work here 5 years, that the west side, the call volume was fairly even between what at that time was 3 stations. And as the west side of Pasco has aged, as the homes have got a little bit older and the people in them have got a little bit older, we've seen a huge increase in the call volume on the west side as compared to the east side of town. It's just been pretty interesting to watch that demographic age and the increased call volume associated with that. And we're also finding that with some fairly affordable housing costs on the west side, a lot of older people downsizing into homes on the west side and then needing medical care. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. The other thing that council obviously knows we're looking at is some very high-density residential development and a very large 450-bed assisted living facility going in on Burns Road. A typical assisted living facility generates 2 calls per year per bed. And that's about what we run in the nursing homes off of 20th, is a couple calls per bed in those facilities. We don't have anything that's 450 beds and it's going to generate 800 or 900 calls a year just in one facility. So that's a pretty significant impact. And we have seen over the last 2 years our call volume go up in huge amounts, 18% last year between 2021 and 2022. And in my few short years in the fire service, I've never seen an 18% increase in calls in 1 year. It's really surprised me. And we really can't pin them all on COVID. We can maybe pin them all on kind of the difference in the world today, but certainly not just COVID-related calls. So that's kind of what drives the need. I don't know if council has any questions on that. Okay. And it's important when we talk about the things that we need to also look back at what we've done. We've had a lot of success with the relocation of Station 83 into a much larger facility and help minimize the response times because we knew that most of our calls were north of the highway. And now that we're in a bigger station, there may even be an option in the short term to put a second ambulance in that station that we wouldn't have been able to do in the smaller station if we find that the call volume is getting so high up there that we can't get a medic unit to those people in a reasonable time frame. So that relocation has given us a lot of options and it's put us in the location to provide a better response time, total response travel time especially to that high volume. And then the addition of Station 84, that actually allowed us to move 3 up there. And it really, just my personal opinion, the Riverview area, which was a very old area of the city, was very underserved. And it was time to get a facility in there to help cover that Riverview area. And then make our protection rating 3 that we got about, it's going to be 5 years ago next year, 2023, we're scheduled for our next re-rate. So it'll be 5 years since we obtained that protection class 3. So we'll see how we do next year. So with that, that's kind of my portion of it, unless there's any questions from council on where we're at right now.
Any questions or comments from council for now? Looks like we do not. Go ahead, Director Sejal.
So with any of the needs, there comes the need to fund it and where the money would come from. And as our city is growing really rapidly, the timely planning of service levels and infrastructures that go with it is very critical. And we do this long-term planning, though 5 years, 3 fire stations feels very short and very compressed, via our capital improvement plan. So council would have seen these fire stations at various schedules in our last recent CIP. And however, sometimes the capital is the cheapest expense when it comes to staffing a fire station. Right now, we're looking at about $4 million, not including some of the fire administrative costs for each fire station that provides ambulance and fire services. So $4 million annually every year, and with 3 fire stations, you're essentially looking at about $12 million. The good news is that we do have an ambulance fund, so it's a different revenue stream. For our EMS services, we collect different fees, like availability and a transport fee are major parts of them. And availability fee is essentially for each resident of the city. They pay a fee via their utility bills every month for having the ambulance be there when you call. And then the transport fee for when you are actually in the ambulance going to the hospital. Also with general fund, our fire services, we collect taxes, grants, fees, all sorts of various revenue sources that help fund our fire services. So it helps a little bit to break out that $4 million cost between 2 different funds. And so right now, that is how we are funding our operational expenses for fire stations, which includes both the ambulance and fire services. The future options, we're talking about growth, and we're talking about commercial and industrial growth, and that means that we are going to be collecting more in property taxes, more in sales taxes, things like that. So your fire services, you're going to have to use those incremental taxes that will be coming in to fund those services. Is it enough, or does it leave enough for other services? Might be something that we will need to look at. Also, we will need to update our ambulance availability fee as well. And also, 4 years ago, we did a complete revamp of our ambulance availability fee. And that also helped make our rates much more equitable across the board, but then also bring in more revenue without increasing a flat fee for everyone, right? And so we're also looking at, while there's not as many areas where we need to do that anymore, there's still some places where we can do better and change our rates to make it a little bit more equitable. So we could look at those areas. And then the other 2 options are both property taxes, but a little bit different types of property taxes. Your levy lid lifts are essentially, there's a lid on how much we can increase every year, but there's a lid which is $3.60 per 1,000 assessed valuation for the city of Pasco. And we could lift that and increase our property taxes by more than 1%. And there's various ways of doing that, but that's essentially the concept. And then there's EMS levy, exactly the same thing. Our residents wouldn't know the difference, very likely. But both need to be voted in by the people, and EMS would be only for ambulance services. And so those are some options where they can be utilized for operational expenses. And of course, the existing 2 with the taxes, the existing taxes as well as the existing availability fee. Next slide, please. And then the capital expenses, ambulance fee is not allowed to expend any funds on capital expenses at all, so that's a restriction that they have. So when, as council remembers, you authorized an issuance of LTGO bonds to relocate the 2 fire stations. So of course there's the LTGO bonds that are an option. Of course the taxes and fees that could go to issue or pay for the debt service for that bond. And also real estate excise taxes. And those are taxes that we collect when there's a sale of a real estate. And those taxes are specifically and restricted use for capital purposes only. There's very minimal maintenance that can be done via those funding sources. So those are things that we usually use for our construction. You will see our parks, facilities, fire, police, city hall facilities being funded out of REIT. And then future options are impact fees. A fire impact fee is allowed, and you can utilize that only for capital purposes only. So it's not something that if a fire station costs $9 million, it's not like you're going to collect the $9 million today and start building. So we'll have to think about some interim funding till all of those impact fees are collected, but that's still an option. And then again, the levy lid lifts. They will provide more revenue, and the EMS levy as well. They will provide more revenue to pay for debt service to build the fire stations themselves. Right now, it's about $8 million in current value to build a fire station. We're very experienced at that cost now at this point. And about $1.5 million for apparatus costs because, the ladder trucks and ambulances are quite expensive as well. And these are all new fire stations, so we would have to buy additional apparatus to tool them. So with that, those are kind of the funding sources. It's very high level at this time, as Mr. Zabel mentioned. And with that, if you have any questions for me.
Thank you. At this moment, I will open up conversation. Councilwoman Roach.
Out of curiosity, thank you for the presentation. When was the last time we did a levy lid lift?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think we ever have. There could have been one that was a fire pension related that was probably in the 80s, if not 60s. I've forgotten my last research.
I think actually there was one after the 1% was imposed. Prior to the 1%, you could raise your levy up to 6% a year. So there really wasn't a need to do that back then. But there was a time where council utilized their bank capacity, all of their bank capacity.
We used the bank capacity.
We did, but there was a time in the early 2000s where it went up pretty significantly and then came right back down because of the amount of growth. And that could have been, I don't think it was levy lid lift, a voted levy lid lift though.
Yeah, I do not think so.
Yeah, I think it was just an exercise of bank capacity at the time.
But we can research that and get back to you.
Yeah, have we ever imposed a fire impact fee?
We have not. It's something that really has only been available for the last 5 or 6 years, I think now. And we've done an evaluation, or at least a preliminary one. It's not at a point where we'd be ready to bring it to council, but we have done an evaluation of what that might look like.
Okay, and just one additional question in terms of these 3 potential fire stations. What is the Chief Gear anticipated year of need to have this, the first one built out, second, third?
I feel that you need to have 85 on Road 100 built out by the end of 23.
Okay.
And then Station 7 is what the order is kind of messed up now because we didn't expect everything to go the way it did. But Station 7, we had always kind of planned on being in the industrial area. And we have property at AutoZone for that station. And in our master plan, it had always been tied to the casino construction. However, the question's coming up with the increased industrial development going north about whether it's going to have to be accelerated. And that one I would say needs to be done by 25, I think is the date that we put in there. And then a last one by 27, somewhere in 27, 28. I don't know how fast the city's going to grow to the northwest. And we really haven't even looked at seriously at any property in the northwest end because the road network is so fragmented right now that I don't want to commit to a parcel of property there until I see some build out of the road network.
So that 9.5 million, and I know what the word apparatus means, but does that apparatus of 1.5 million include a land purchase if required for a certain area?
No, the 9 million would, we already own, the property for 5 on Broadmoor and the property, for Station 7 at AutoZone. We purchased those a couple years ago.
So there's just one that's left.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, and that one would not be till 27, 26, 27, I think, before you'd seriously need to have property. It might be nice to tie some property up sooner if it comes up and we know at the road network, but there's not, I don't think there's a hurry on that property.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney, you have some questions?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Barajas, and thank you for the presentation, or we'll call it a conversation. So I'm convinced that Chief Gear, I think you did a great job a few weeks ago of laying out the case for it. I think it's hard to argue with that data. Paying for it's of course a different story. So first question I have is is it 87 that's over in the industrial, would be serving the industrial area? Okay, so the idea of impact fees is so that growth pays for growth. And there's multiple ways of having growth pay for that for itself. One of them is through specific agreements with certain entities. For example, like Dairy Gold, if they can't be insured without this, then they really need us to build this and accelerate it probably earlier than we were originally planning on. Is that something that we would ask them as a particular industrial user to contribute separately from impact fees, contribute to the construction of that facility? Same question also plays out for the Colville tribes. I know we need to do an agreement for services provided to them as well. Is there a capital portion of that negotiation that would help cover the capital cost for the station as well?
Yeah, let me,
Okay.
if you don't mind, I'll take that. So, as to industry out there, and particularly with respect to potentially Dairy Gold, since it's over that 5 mile distance, I think that's definitely a conversation we'll be having with them, is a direct contribution, whether that's through an impact fee or through a SEPA type extraction, to provide a better fire service out there within 5 miles, basically. So that would be our AutoZone project. Now, from a council policy standpoint, if you were to say get 15 or 20% of the cost of the project, that leaves us with matching the other 80, and we couldn't ask a developer to build all of it, for instance. So there has to be a nexus between what we're asking for and what their impact is. And then, of course, then you have the ongoing staffing of a station, which is in itself pretty significant as well. So to answer your question, yes, but there's more to it. Similarly, the Colvilles, we've been in conversation with them on municipal services, and most definitely there would not be a mechanism under an impact fee that would unless we negotiate that into our agreement with them, or in some other way negotiate a payment in lieu of an impact fee. But that is definitely something we would want to be discussing with them.
Great, and just furthering that just a little bit, we know that there's going to be more industrial growth in the Ryman Industrial Center, and that again is the same conversations we're having with Dairy Gold. Is the Port of Pasco a willing partner in this facility, especially the one in 87? Again, I believe very strongly that growth should pay for growth. Impact fees is one mechanism for doing that, but we want to be there's other ways of making sure that we have that nexus with them, and I just want to make sure we've explored all those options as we're looking for how do we pay for this. A lot of facility, both a facility and the apparatus and people.
Yeah, so the Port of Pasco, as council's aware, they're more probably facilitators of the development more than they are developers themselves. So I think it would be hard to, while they may be willing to sit down and participate financially in a fire station, I think probably the more productive conversation is going to be making sure that they understand and are supporting and helping us and helping their prospective purchasers to understand there's going to be a need to participate in a future fire station.
Okay, all right, appreciate that. And then, sorry, there's one question I had for Director Sigdahl. So is there a difference in the cost to voters between a levy lid lift and the EMS levy? Or is this functionally, they're different? I understand the mechanism of using that funds is very different, and the approval of that is very different. But in terms of actual costs, in terms of property tax costs, are they functionally the same?
They function the same, but EMS levies are limited up to 50 cents per thousand, and whereas the levy lift, it is whatever is voted in. So the city could choose 25 cents or 75 cents on, whatever that number is, and if the voters approve that. So there is no limit to that, and there's also, again, as you mentioned, the usage of the funds. So if it's EMS levy, then it is restricted to that service only.
I might make a comment on the lid lift. City of Vancouver just did a public safety lid lift, a pretty substantial one to fund police and fire services over the next 10 years, and had a very good plan laid out on how they were going to use those funds from that additional property tax levy to fund public safety services and improvements.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so I know it's a lot for us to think about. When do we need to start making a decision on this? Because I know that there's sure it's only $30 million that we need to figure out how to come up with in additional expenditures. So I mean, obviously it's a big ask for how we get there. When do we need to get there so we can make sure we ask any questions timely fashion?
I think preliminarily on a ballot measure, at least that piece of it, we're probably talking realistically next year. So not a big rush on that. I think the fire impact fee is something council may want to talk about sooner rather than later, as we still have a very strong growth rate. There's a lot of development coming on board, and unless we either capture them at the SEPA level or we have the impact fee in place before the permits are issued, we lose the opportunity for new growth to pay for at least that portion of their share of a new facility.
I'm certainly in favor of some portion of an impact fee, but not until I understand the full picture of what our impact fees already look like and how they compare to other cities. That's something I think we talked about, the traffic impact fee, and we've talked about with others. That just really want to make sure we understand that fully, so we know how we measure up to everyone else and make these decisions. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And another comment from Councilman Serrano?
Well, to that point, yeah, there's a couple comments that I do want to share with council. We had this conversation today a little bit at the staff level. Matter of fact, council member in Toronto, I had a similar conversation last week. But so the city obviously doesn't have a fire impact fee in place at this time, and if council were to authorize such a fee, it would be in addition to a school impact fee, a park impact fee, and a transportation impact fee that you already charge. Council's in charge of the school impact fee, even though the fees go to the school district. So to council member, Deputy Mayor Maloney's standpoint or point of view, council may wish to consider the cumulative impact of all these simultaneously rather than separate. Because we are going to be coming to you later in the year with probably an adjustment. We're doing the Parks and Recreation and Open Space Plan. Likely that may result in at least some consideration by council of a modification of that fee, as well as the Transportation System Master Plan is largely complete. We'll be coming to council to talk about traffic impact fees. Right now, the traffic impact fees haven't been touched in, 20 years. So that our impact fee rate is extremely low, which means anything we do to it is going to look really bad percentage-wise, by the way. And then, of course, school fees. I think school mitigation is going to be up for council consideration this year as well. So there's all these things coming kind of together all at the same time, which is good because you're going to be able to look at that cumulative impact, particularly at a time where, that's one of the things that we can directly control on the cost of a house is impact fees. Can't control cost of materials, can't control cost of land, except to the extent we can make land available through urban growth area and city annexations. But so thank you for that opening, Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Councilman Serrano.
So that was one of the questions I was gonna ask. I appreciate that, Dave, addressing the cumulative impact that we need to address. One other comment, a handful of other comments. The next one would be, I hope that you can use Chief Gear's math of planning to be here for 5 years and staying 13, Dave. You know, it's an open invitation. That aside, Chief, you mentioned Vancouver. Did they have the vote? Do they have the materials available that we could use as reference? I think, you know, seeing what other municipalities are putting together as packages on levy lid. I mean, this is, I don't want to say a scary topic, but this is one of the ones that the public unquestionably needs to have trust in council when we're talking about whether it's an impact fee or a levy lid. The more transparency, the more information we can get out, the better, the earlier, obviously. So can you speak to that Vancouver study just a little bit?
I don't have a lot of information. I was surprised to see it come up and go through the election process here a little while ago and how they passed it with a real high number. And it was kind of, well, that was an interesting way to propose a city lid lift as proposing it just as a public safety lid lift, not a general, we're going to just bury the money somewhere in the city and use it for whatever we want. I will get more information. I know the chief there. I'll get more information from him and have it available for us, probably at the retreat if that's what council would like to have, so we could take a look at what they did and how they sold that.
Yeah, I think that'd be an appropriate place to look, you know, just that way, rather than just expressing that we're looking at it, at least we're, you know, combing the research and available data. Not to say that this is the appropriate path forward, but we're going to have to figure something out to finance these facilities, and then equally important to operate them in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm. And I'd be a little remiss to say that, or to leave out the fact that our police department's also going through their strategic planning process and have identified some needs there as well. And to the chief's point, public safety lead lift, you know, that we could share with the community that this is for these specific things, may be a strategy that council would want to consider later on, because there's needs in both police and fire.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Any further comment from our council? Looks like there's none. Thank you for that presentation, Chief. Thank you for answering all the questions. We are definitely growing, and we absolutely need our fire stations to keep those discounts on level 3. Okay, and with that, we move forward to item D, Parks Off-Season Work and Activities, Director Ratkai.
All right, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. As you may recall, in early 2020, this body approved the conversion of seasonal parks employees into forming an additional 7 full-time employees for our Parks and Facilities division. This change has not only brought forth better service and more reliable maintenance throughout the entire year, it's, you know, especially our ever-growing parks and facilities. As the expectations for staff rises, both within City Hall and among the community, we strive to provide service to meet the City Council goals, particularly quality of life, economic vitality, and community identity. This change in staffing has really allowed the team to work on additional items in the winter season. So while we have more reliable full-time employees during the summer mowing season, what are we up to during the winter when the parks aren't growing, we're not watering them, we're not mowing them? So I wanted to bring forth our facilities manager, Dan Doda, to provide City Council with an update on our 2021-2022 winter projects and what the team's been up to. Dan, take it away.
Good evening, can you hear it? All right, thanks. Madam Mayor, council members, I do want to let you know, during the winter, we play a lot of pinochle, and we're not any good at it, trust me. No, actually, we wanted, tonight, we've got the opportunity to come in and thank you, like Zach had mentioned, for being able to allow us to expand. But at the same time, we're using all the resources we possibly can. So we put together a list, and Zach, if you can show that first. Here's just a small sample. You can see on the left, that list. And then the one on the right is, I brought it up so you can see it a little bit better and you can read it, of what we've been working on. And in the meantime, we've got to work on snow. We've got to work on tumbleweeds and all that other stuff. But with extra help, we're actually able to give us a little bit better emphasis on making our parks and our buildings a little nicer. So these are a couple just of the examples. So if we go to the next slide, one of our highlights this year, we feel that if you go into the parks, one of the first places the parents go is they take the kids to the restroom. And if they're a disaster and they're horrible, that's the impression they're going to get of the parks, that we're not taking care of it. So what we want to do is we want to really focus on making this nice. However, there's vandalism all the time. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to work smarter, not harder. And we've done some research and we've got new gadgets. You want to try it? But anyway, it's actually like this soap dispensers. You can take a baseball bat to it and you can't destroy it. And it'll still look nice and presentable. Another one is the exit buttons. That's the famous one where we've got these magnetic locks. They're always broken. Well, we've got these new ones that are nice and flat. You can't break them off, yet they still light up, still in English and Spanish. So we're pretty excited about doing some of those improvements. But we also want to put new coat paint and everything else on it. So when it walks in, you see this bright white, gray floor. It looks good. It looks sharp. They're all the same colors, all the same bathrooms, so that when we do paint them, we have those color matching and it's easy to take care of. So on our next slide here, here's an example of some of the improvements we're doing, but we're partnering. We can't do it all ourselves. And here's with Public Works, they're working on replacing some of the sidewalks that are buckled because of the trees. And so what we do is we help them pull the trees down, or if we can save the tree, we will, but we're working together to save those resources. Taking down some of these trees, a tree like that, if we were to go out a house, that's about a $3,000 removal. So on the next slide, you can see again, we had a dangerous tree come up out at Tijuana, and the partnership we worked on this one was Public Works was getting ready to replace one of their trucks. And it was going to go to auction. So we were able to get that truck, and you can't really see it real well, but the guy in the bucket is running their old truck. Now, it may not be good for doing streetlights every single day, but it does wonders for us out in the parks. We were able to get that tree down that day as soon as the wind started blowing it. So it made it really a good asset for us. Here's where we've been working with the police department and the extra help. If you see on the left, that's how the landscape is all overgrown. When we've been talking with the police about how to make our landscape more appealing, but also safer for people to be out there, we've been making these modifications and trimming them. You can see how much more appealing it looks, but also safer for the people in the public and the businesses. So another example of how we're trying to squeeze every resource we can, we're buying equipment that is used all year round, not just once during the springtime. So like this piece of equipment here is a traditional ball field groomer. But what we were able to do is buy different attachments that go on it. And so we actually do snow removal. We do, you can see down in the bottom corner on those boulevards out there on Burden and Sandifer, we actually will do snow throwing out. And so it makes it kind of nice. But we use this equipment all year round now, instead of just the 9 months out of the year. Here's another project we're working on. DNR has got a grant going on, and it's for every dollar we spend, they give us $2. But what we're doing is we are trying to expand our resources, and we built a nursery out there a couple years ago. And this one is modern technology, and it's like structural soil, but what we're doing is bare roots. And we put it in the gravel pit that we're working on. The nice thing about this is I can't plant 50 trees all at once, but I can put it in this gravel pit and use my available resources, my team, to be able to plant them when I can. But in the meantime, you can see how well the root growth is. And so we're actually getting this built this spring, and we'll be able to bring in, traditionally, a 2-inch tree is about $200. We can buy these trees for about $10. So it's a big bonus for us. So the next slide, you can show some of the park upgrades we're working on this year. And we're putting in pickleball. Another big one is cornhole, if you can believe that one. but there's a lot. So we're putting those in through 3 of our parks. And what we want to do is have it out there already. People can bring their own bean bags or they can go to recreation and get them. We also want to put in new barbecue pits out there so that people can actually use them in the parks. Before they're in kind of random spots, but we want to put them in where it's bringing in the families and around the shelters and all of that. So, and the next slide is another example of how we're working on smarter, not harder, with the central control system. One of the things is if we have to reduce the amount of water with the central control system, I can do that from my computer. And I can change all 138 clocks versus going out to each and every one of them. But what's really nice about these clocks is that they're smart enough that they know that if we have a mainline break or a broken head, it'll shut it down, and then it'll send me an email. I'm not having to go out there and find it. It's doing all the work for me, and at the same time, it's reducing the water usage by 33%. So that's a big one that we're really trying to push right now. And the next slide is the last one. We're using the PUD and their rebate grants, change out LED lights. And the most recent example is, I don't know how familiar you are with the downtown post office, but we changed out all the lights. If you see the old pennant style on the left there, we've changed them over to the new one right next to it. It looks the same, but it's LED. It's a lot brighter. It looks modern. We put in LED down the hallway, really brightened it up. And the nice thing is PUD gave us money to put them in. We just had to supply the labor. But now I'm not going in there every year to replace light bulbs. I'm going in there every 10 years. So it's brightened it up, made it better, and made our workload a little less. So that's what we've been working on, not the pinochle game. And we've really tried to find that pinochle game, but we haven't done it. So anyway, that's my presentation for tonight. So do you have any questions?
Yeah, I think if, before we get to questions, I think just to kind of summarize everything, we've been really working hard on being wise stewardship of the public dollar and utilizing our resources intelligently. And I think the addition of the full-time staff has enabled us to address some of these issues ahead of time, to spend that time working on these winter projects to save us more time in the future and certainly more money and be better able to allocate to maintenance. And, the growing season's coming pretty quick, so we're already gearing up for that as well. And chipping away at some of these projects to help us out. So yeah, as Dan was leading into, if there's any questions of council, we're happy to help you at this time.
Mr. Dauda, thank you so much for your presentation today. Any questions or comments? Councilman Serrano.
Thank you. I'll just say thank you for spending the PUD's money wisely and not our taxpayers. Maybe that's our next lid trade-off, right? In all seriousness, though, thank you for being good stewards.
Thank you. And I like your line, work smarter, not harder. Thank you so much. One
you.
other comment, question from Deputy Mayor Maloney.
Yep. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Dauda. Just real quickly, I'm really excited about the city tree nursery idea. Arthur Job has taken the opportunity a number of times to talk to me about our tree inventory and how much value we have tied up in the trees that the city owns across the city. And it's a massive number. And so any way we can do to better maintain that, and it keeps our city beautiful, it keeps the streets cooler, which actually is, not only does it help with irrigation, incidentally for our boulevards, but it's a really huge quality of life thing, especially in this side of town where we're seeing a lot of old trees start to go down. I'd be very interested in seeing how we could, what we could do to help make sure that homeowners also have an opportunity. I know I've shared that with the city manager in the past, and I know that there's some work being done. So I'm not trying to belabor that right now. Really excited about that program, and I think that's going to be well received in the community. So thank you.
Thank you again. Any further comments, questions? Looks like there's none. Thank you so much for coming over, Dan. All right, and with that, we move on to item E, resolution bid award for the water main replacement, Maple Drive, AC Main, Road 100 to Road 103. Director Worley.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. This project is one that is in the budget for this year, and we have a lot of utility projects that are in there for improvements, and I'm going to turn this over to CIP Manager Maria Serra.
Good
Good e-
evening.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. We are presenting to you the award for Maple Drive waterline replacement. This project extends between Road 103 and Road 100 and proposes to replace a water line that has been subject to many repairs needs. So it was listed as one of our priority projects for water main replacements. We designed the project and then advertised it in the newspaper. We received 7 bids. They were very competitive. The lowest bid was P&H Construction, and it was in the amount of $325,950.95, and this is below the engineer's estimate, but close enough where we didn't have any concerns with the bids as they were presented. So at this point, we recommend approval and award of this bid.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions or comments from our council members? Looks like there's no questions or comments. Okay, so we move on to item F, resolution termination of Mid-Columbia Regional Cable Commission and Interlocal Agreement. And City Manager Dave.
Thank you and good evening again. This is an ILA that the city entered into with Richland and Kennewick back in the mid-90s. Oh, back in the time where we actually thought we could control rates and things like that with the cable company. And we've learned over the many years we can't even require a permit of them. So we've come a long way since 1994. Needless to say, we never really were able to enact for whatever reasons. This is back in the 90s and early 2000s. This commission, and so we're at 2015. FCC put out new rules that basically rendered our ability to the extent we ever had the ability to control cable rates moot. So it's no longer serves a purpose to have this agreement. So the three cities at the staff level have agreed to take this to our councils and just terminate the agreement.
Thank you for that. Any questions or comments from our council regarding this topic? We have Councilman Campos.
I think this should go the way of most cable and we cut it.
Okay, thank you. I guess there's no further comment or questions from our council. And with that, we go on to item 6, miscellaneous discussion. City Manager Dave, do you have any comments?
I have just a few things to probably mostly remind council of, not necessarily inform you of, but we have our community forum at Hapo Center, 6:30 p.m. this Thursday. So we expect a good attendance there. Peanuts Park Farmers Market ribbon cutting has been set for 1 p.m. Friday, March 11th. So we'll make sure that's on your calendars if it's not already on your calendars. And then big news today with respect to masking and so forth. The governor of Washington, along with the governors of Oregon and California, agreed to a coordinated end of indoor masking with certain exceptions, 11:59 p.m. on March 11th. So beginning March 12th, we'll be able to walk around indoors at City Hall and grocery stores and other places without our masks. So thank you.
Good to hear. Any other comments from our council members? No further comment from our council members. I do have one comment before we move on to our next item. With everything that's going on in the world, with the issues, the conflict that's going on in Ukraine, so I did write something very short, and I'll read it to you. After seeing the mayor of Kyiv on the news has made me think about what the city and its council are up against in Ukraine. He's made statements encouraging unity. With that, I want to share that our heart, and I hope that all our council members here tonight goes out to the people, the good people of Kyiv and all of Ukraine. And that's what I have to say for tonight.
Mayor, I'd just like to say thank you for recognizing that. You know, we're in our little corner of the world, and yet it's such a small world. I actually have a cousin who used to be a resident of Kiev and is a Ukrainian citizen. And as of just 3 days ago, she is a refugee in Poland with her husband. And the Polish people have welcomed the Ukrainians that are crossing the border there. And so really grateful too for the open arms that they're receiving. So thank you for recognizing that.
You're welcome. There's no further comment. City manager?
My apologies. I had just left it on.
Okay. With that, we move on to item 7, executive session. Do we have a need for executive session?
No need this evening.
No need for executive session. Thank you for that. Since there's no executive session and everyone has made a comment, it is now 8:56. And with that, we adjourn our meeting tonight. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, everyone that is watching us tonight.